Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner. Welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. Tonight, we're doing a California-centric show for you, and we're talking about two bills, one of which is bad and one of which is good. So what we need you to do is we need you to call your representatives about these bills and tell them that we have to vote one of them down and the other one up. And here to talk to me about the first bill, well, we have two guests to talk about the first bill. We have Eric Brooks and we have Adam Scow. And I'm bringing them both in right now, and they're both up in San Francisco. And Adam, I'm going to ask you to tilt your computer down. So you're right there in the center. All right, guys. So who wants to talk about the first bill? Let's go with you, Eric. Why don't you tell us about this bill that we're dubbing worse than the Enron situation, a bill to regionalize and privatize the electric grid in California?
Yeah, it sucks, to put it in two words, and the bill number is AB 813. That stands for Assembly Bill 813, and it is it's a hijack of our electricity grid. Basically, what's going on is that the coal industry wants to get back into California. There's a corporation called Berkshire Hathaway, who many of you probably know is owned and run by Warren Buffett and others, but mainly Warren Buffett, who's supposed to be our nice grandfather. But actually, one of Berkshire Hathaway's biggest products is coal electricity. And Warren Buffett and his corporation have done things like gone to the state of Nevada to try to undermine their ability to put up rooftop solar panels. Luckily, they didn't get away with it. They've tried that kind of thing in other states. In California, their attack is AB 813. And what it will do is take California's nonprofit electricity grid operator, which is called CalISO, and it will make that nonprofit state grid part of a regional private grid. And guess who the biggest corporation is that runs that regional Western United States private grid? Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett. And their intention is to make it possible to get their coal electricity back into California. A lot of people probably know that, except for in the city of LA, we have gotten rid of coal electricity in California. Well, Warren Buffett doesn't like that. He wants to sell coal electricity back into California. And the way they're going to try to do that is take over the grid. And it's not just coal, it's also natural gas and other fossil fuels. So that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that once California's nonprofit state grid becomes part of a regional Western private grid, because it's a regional grid and not a state grid, that gets rid of our state's rights, and that puts our California electricity grid under the control of Donald Trump and his Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So Donald Trump will control our electricity grid if AB 813 passes. Not a good plan.
What do you have to say about this, Adam? Your organization is Food and Water Watch. I'm sure you've been one of the lead environmental organizations fighting this. Do you have anything to add to talk about how bad this is going to be?
Yeah, well, we're very concerned about losing control of our energy future. We know if we're going to survive climate change, we have to get off of fossil fuels. That's what science tells us. That's what we can see before our eyes unfolding in California and around the world. And to be able to do that, we're going to have to have control of our grid and be able to mandate truly renewable energies on that grid as we rapidly phase out coal and gas. And this bill, AB 813, takes us in the opposite direction. It gets rid of that control. As Eric mentioned, we're only one state in many states around the West, merging with dirty energy states like Wyoming and Montana, which are two of the biggest coal states in the country. We're already importing a lot of fracked gas from Colorado and New Mexico. And this bill, if it goes through, will keep us stuck on these dirty forms of energy. So it's a very dangerous bill. It needs to be defeated. It is going to the Senate Energy Committee next week, next Tuesday on June 19th. and we need to stop this bill as soon that before it passes the legislature.
Now, let me ask you both about who sponsored this bill. Is this bill originating in the state Senate, or did it originate in the state assembly?
Assembly. It's Assembly member Chris Holden from Pasadena in the LA area.
Now, so did it pass the assembly? Has it gone through all the committees in the assembly now?
Yeah, it's a 2-year bill. So it started last year. Last year, what they tried to do was sneak this bill in the very last week of the legislative session, the first week of September. They do this a lot, so that they think they can get around grassroots activists like ourselves by trying to pass the bill with just 1 week warning. We all mobilized and stopped it within a week last year, but it's a 2-year bill, so it's coming up again this year. They've made it more streamlined and easier to pass. So we've got our hands full. We've got some more allies this time in the labor unions that often side against us on things like this, but this time they're with us. And so we've got a good shot at killing this thing, but we need everybody to mobilize to make sure that we do kill it.
Okay, so does it have a spot? See, this is one thing I'm not sure of. Does it have to have a sponsor in the Senate, or is it Holden's bill that just happens to be being heard in the Senate?
It has to have a floor jockey, and last year I don't believe it got one. We'll have to see. There will need to be a senator that will carry the bill. Every once in a while we've been able to stop bills by making them so toxic that no senator wants to touch them, but I don't think that's going to happen this time.
So is this the first committee that it's being heard in the state Senate, Adam?
Yes, and the bill now has 2 Senate co-sponsors, one Bob Wachowski from the South Bay and the Bay Area, and most recently and most concerning, Henry Stern from the San Fernando Valley is now a co-author on the bill.
Oh, this is outrageous. Okay, let's give a little bit of backstory about Henry Stern, because Henry Stern took over from Fran Pavley. He was her hand-picked successor. He was a legislative aide to her, a policy aide. And people who've watched my show know that I fought her bill, SB 4, which was a fracking regulatory bill, I'm putting in air quotes, that actually did nothing to regulate fracking, and many would say caused unregulated fracking during the 2 years that the study was being done. Like we needed another study to find out that fracking was bad. Anyway, Henry Stern took over her seat, and Food and Water Watch and the folks at Aliso Canyon were very successful in getting him to author a bill. I think it was SB 57 last year, to basically say that Aliso Canyon should not be reopened until the root cause of the gas leak. You remember, this was the largest gas leak in the United States history. It leaked for 4 months, and thousands of families had to be evacuated, and they're still having health problems. Well, that bill went down to defeat, but he was considered a champion. So my question is, Adam, in your estimation, what turned him? Why is he where he was going against SoCal Gas, which is owned by Sempra Energy? Now he's carrying water for that industry. What do you think is the backstory there?
Well, I'd like to believe he's misguided and not fully informed at this point. But there is an enormous amount of pressure in Sacramento to push this what's called grid regionalization forward, AB 813. NRDC and EDF are pushing this, as are a few other environmental groups.
Where does the Sierra Club stand on it?
Sierra Club is against the bill, which is a very good sign. And they've spent a lot of money trying to push this this grid thing forward, selling it as a boon for renewables. One of their talking points is that we need to be able to export California renewables to other states. Well, the reality is the problem with that is that we have so much dirty energy on our grid here in California that we can't fully use all the renewables we're generating in state now. Our renewables are currently capped by all this dirty fracked gas, and instead of mandating that we phase that out, here comes corporate marketeers with another market solution, similar to energy deregulation in the 1990s, saying, oh, well, let's just open up the market. Let's have energy trading throughout the West, and that'll just magically solve the problems. Well,
oh my God. Can you please describe what happened with Enron? Because this is, I can't believe, George Santayana says that those that don't understand history are condemned to repeat it. I can't believe you're telling me this story again. Explain to the people what the Enron scheme was all about and how that blew up. It basically caused the recall of Gray Davis, the governor.
Eric, go for it.
Yeah, well, back in the mid-90s, in many states, I think it was 15, 20 states, an attempt was made to do what's called deregulation of the electricity grid. And what deregulation meant, the way they were handling it, was dividing generating energy from delivering energy over wires. And they convinced some environmental groups and others that it would be a great idea to do this, to make it so that what's delivered over the wires is still delivered by your monopoly utility, like PG&E, SDG&E, or Southern California Edison. But that when energy was generated, that would be a quote-unquote free market. And I would guess that most of your viewers know that there's no such thing as a free market. And not only was this not a free market, it was a gamed market. Enron and PG&E and other corporations set us up to get gouged. And so they separated the generation from the wires. They told environmental groups, they suckered a lot of environmental groups in by telling them, oh, once you're able to choose which generator you get your electricity from, you will be able to buy clean energy. And the problem with that was that it would be individual consumers reaching out to individual generators of electricity trying to buy their clean energy, and they would not be able to compete against the big monopolies that deliver energy in big amounts. So that plan was doomed to fail from the beginning, but it was passed anyway because the environmental groups got suckered into supporting it. Then what happened next is that Enron and utilities like PG&E scammed the system. They artificially reduced the supply of electricity by turning power plants off when they didn't need to be turned off, saying it was from maintenance. And they created much higher energy prices that just went to the moon. Enron made out like bandits. PG&E made out like bandits on this. PG&E ended up had to go bankrupt and got stuck for tens of billions of dollars, which of course the customers ended up getting stuck for that. So it was just a mess. And this is what happens when you take, your nonprofit and your community energy systems and you turn them over to the quote unquote free market and private enterprise. And especially when somebody as voracious as Berkshire Hathaway's Warren Buffett is sitting on the sidelines, sharpening his teeth to get to our electricity grid, that makes the Enron scandal look like a child's tea party in comparison, and we must not let it happen.
Yeah, well, Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, also owns Burlington Northern Railroad, and they basically in the railroad cars take all this fracked gas and tar sands oil and ship it around the country. So that's whether we stop the pipelines or not, this oil is still getting to market. And the oil trains are actually some of the worst. We call them bomb trains because in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, it actually blew up and vaporized an entire town, killing something like 42 people, if I remember correctly. And we've been pretty successful, local communities in stopping some of these bomb trains here in California. And we've also been pretty successful getting fracking bans. Food and Water Watch has been the lead organizer in some of those fracking bans. And, I've worked with you, Eric, on community choice energy programs, which is an alternative to these corporations. So, Adam, what's the plan for defeating this, and what do people need to do?
People need to get in touch with their senators now, regardless of where they live in California. Tell them that they want them to vote no on AB 813. And we'll be posting, if there's an action alert not already there, on our website and on our Facebook page, so stay tuned for that. We also have an op-ed on our Facebook page that we published in the San Francisco Chronicle, authored by our executive director, Winona Howder, who talks about these issues in a very concise way. People need to get in touch with their senators now, saying they want them to vote no on AB 813. In particular, if they live in Henry Stern's district, if you live in Nancy Skinner's district, if you live in Mark McGuire's district in Sonoma County. Bob Hertzberg is a key vote on this committee as well, also in LA. And San Diego, they have the Senate leader now, Tony Atkins, who will be a big player in all of this. They knew they'd be hearing from their constituents loudly and clearly that they expect them to vote no on AB 813.
Great. Lauren,
yes.
I left a link in the chat, and I can't see how to grab it and put it on the.
I'll put it on.
Comments.
I'll put it.
So
I'll
grab
put it
that
in the comments. Yeah.
Yeah, that link is to a document that shows people all the senators on the Energy Committee where this is going on the 19th, and people can look for those senators at senate.ca.gov. Or it might be sen.ca.gov, but it's one of those two. And then they can just see if those senators are in their district. It's easy to find that out. And then contact those senators. And even if they're not, contact the ones Adam mentioned and contact the chair of the committee and the co-chair of the committee.
Yeah, well, if we could get one meme between the two of you, if we could get one Facebook meme that's in a graphic that simply has the number, the person's name and the number, and the district, that would be really helpful. Asking somebody to go to senate.gov, whatever it is, that's an extra step. You got to make it easy for people.
The link that I gave you has all their names. It has the aides that handle energy, and it has the aides' emails, and that's how you contact these politicians, is get a hold of the aide. Email the aide that is in charge of energy for that, and that's what that document will give folks. And when you email them your comments, then you can even, I've given the number of all those offices. They can just call that office and call and ask to speak to that aide and say, I want to talk to you about this bill. And it's especially important for organizations to do this. The more organizations we have on board, the better. And that probably gets us to the fact that Food and Water Watch has a sign-on letter that any of you out there who has any small local organization all the way up to an international organization that can sign on to this should do so at Food and Water Watch's site.
Yes, and I've been putting that up. I'm going to put it up again. So I just wanted to mention, before we go on to some other environmental issues that you guys are working on, I think it's important for people to understand that NRDC is not a real environmental organization, and either is the Environmental Defense Fund. They are constantly siding with industry, and they're always talking about these public-private partnerships. EDF is probably the worst one in that. NRDC does sometimes come out on the good side of some of our issues, but what do you make of their supporting this? Either one of you can jump in on this.
Adam,
What's in it for them?
Corporate money. They get money from corporations.
You have to ask them in terms of what's in it for them, but I mean, they are very, I think, geared towards working with corporations as they stand now. And that's a big difference between those two groups and other groups. There's a wide spectrum of politics within the environmental community. And they don't challenge corporate power for the most part, especially when it comes to climate policy. We saw this with their pushing of the cap and trade bill last year, which allows the oil and gas companies to pay to continue business as usual, just to pay to pollute system. So, for us, that's not good enough. We want to see government do its job, which is to regulate out greenhouse gases and to mandate and to force a real transition to clean energy. It's not going to happen by the magic or grace of the market. it's really a test of our democracy for to get our politicians and to get people to take back their government to make it work for them.
Yeah, and I want to add that these market-based solutions are very neoliberal. Neoliberal meaning that, you know, the government entrusts goods and services and resources essentially to private corporations, saying that they can manage it better, and when in fact it's just the opposite. And what we've seen with some of these environmental organizations is they push, and it's not just the ones that the two that we just mentioned. I mean, also the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is all about the carbon tax and dividend, or dividend and fee, or I don't even know what their scheme is. And they pride themselves on being bipartisan. They try to get Republican support as well. I like, you know, good luck with that with today's Republican Party. But the idea that these market-based mechanisms, you know, to allow Chevron, for instance, to pollute at its refinery in Richmond and hurt the environment and also human health in that community, just because they buy a rainforest in Bolivia. And Adam, you were telling me, you were the one who first brought it to my attention that the Indigenous Environmental Network is opposed to this. And they put out a statement at the COPA climate meeting last year saying that they were not in favor of any of these: carbon tax, cap and trade. And also, Adam, say why Food and Water Watch is against an oil extraction tax, because many of our progressive candidates, ones that I endorsed, were pushing for that.
Well, I think the theory with the oil extraction tax and similarly the carbon tax is that we should make fossil fuels more expensive, and then in a perfect world, as fossil fuels get more expensive and renewables get less expensive, there's going to be this natural transition to renewables. And it would be nice if the world was that simple. It would be nice, and I understand that feeling. But reality is a little different with corporate power and politics. As Eric was talking about, we're dealing with monopolies, oligopolies over our energy systems, and what we've seen is corporations like even Exxon and others have embraced the carbon tax, saying, "Oh, well, if that's you just want us to pay some money, you just want some money for the pollution." That's all we have to do to keep polluting and keep drilling for oil. Fine, no problem. You know, back in the day, I was a big proponent of an oil extraction tax in California. It's natural for progressive to think that way. You think you have this big company taking our resources. They should pay something for it, especially as our budget has been decimated in the last decade or so, because we don't make many corporations pay taxes, not just the oil companies, by the way. That's a show for another topic for another show. So, but at this point, if we understand climate change and the fossil fuels correctly, we understand that it is really about survival of life and about human life, and not just human life, but we can start there. And we have to get rid of fossil fuels. So we don't have a luxury to have this long, slow accommodation of the oil and gas industry anymore in our politics. And granted, it's a very big shift. And I think a lot of people just throw their hands up and say, well, we can't do that, or that's just too hard, not going to happen, not practical. Well, it's not practical. It's not about being practical. It's about making this planet, making protecting our future generations, protecting our water, protecting our air. And it's hard work. But that is the actual solution, the scientific solution to the problem. Half-baked measures are not actual solutions. They're just concocted as politically convenient, short-term ideas. But the actual real solution to the problem is to stop drilling for oil and get off of gas and coal.
Yeah. Eric, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would add to that there's a really fundamental issue here, and that is when you monetize anything, then the market takes over. The market we've already talked about, the free market that does not exist. When you monetize pollution, then you're putting pollution in the hands of bankers. And, you know, we all know what bankers did to our economy in 2008. And cap and trade is just that situation on steroids. But even taxes, as Adam's indicating, we need to go for the sources of the pollution and stop them from being sources of pollution. not monetize pollution. Because as soon as you make money out of a problem, then the bankers go nuts and take over.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the Blackstone Group, right? The Blackstone Group is the largest real estate holder right now because they bought up all this foreclosed properties for a song, and now they're renting it out. And they don't have any incentive like a local mom and pop landlord. You know, if you have some problems at work, if you lost your job, if you've had a hospital bill to pay, and you need to be late on the rent, they're not going to have any sympathy for you. They're going to kick you out. And what they're also doing is they're securitizing the rental agreements and selling them off to sovereign wealth funds in the same way they securitized the mortgages during the prior to the housing collapse and the economic collapse in 2008. And it's, you know, talk about profiting from people's misery. It's really very disgusting. But let's change to something positive because, Eric, you're working on community choice energy systems. And since I first met you several years ago, there have been a lot more communities that have joined on. Why don't you tell the viewers what community choice energy is and how many communities in California now have that option?
Yep, I'll get right into that. I want to reel back to something we talked about a little while back just to give people a good way to find information on environmental groups. So if you want to look up an environmental group and see whether it's for real or problematic, you can go to SourceWatch. I think it's sourcewatch.org, but if you look up SourceWatch as one word in your browser, you'll find SourceWatch. And then you just put the name of the organization into there to SourceWatch, and you can read a history of whether it's good or bad, and the bad things it's done, the good things it's done. So community choice energy. So we talked about the deregulation scandal back in the mid-90s and how they separated generating energy from delivering energy over electricity wires. So that ended up being a bad thing. It ended up being a crisis, as you said. It ended up triggering myself and a lot of other organizers to organize to get rid of Governor Gray Davis because he's the one that helped sold us down the river on that. But it also gave us an opportunity. Now that you've separated the energy from the wires, a guy named Paul Fenn decided, well, why don't we make it a law that not just the big utility companies buying energy can choose where the generation happens, not just individual consumers, but let's make it so that communities, under this new division of generation and delivery, communities can decide who generates their energy, and communities can decide to generate it themselves, which is the most important reason for community choice. The community choice law passed in 2002. For any of you political geeks out there, you can look it up. It's AB 117 was the law in 2002. And so what this does is it leaves the deregulation in place, and it makes it so that any community can form what's called a community choice program, and then they can decide who generates their energy. So they stop buying the energy itself through their utility, like PG&E or Southern California Edison or San Diego Gas and Electric, and they start buying it themselves as a community. So that does two things. One, it makes your energy supply partly nonprofit because you're no longer paying a utility to buy the energy. And it also allows you to decide exactly what your energy sources are. And across the state, there are now over a dozen of these community choice programs, and there are going to be scores of them soon. Within the next 5 years, it's predicted that over 60% of our energy supply will be bought by these community programs. And it enables you to buy energy from any place you want, and that means renewables. And most importantly, it enables you to build local clean energy efficiency programs, battery storage, which is now competitive with even the price of coal. Solar is now competitive with the price of coal. So it allows your community to switch from getting electricity through big monopoly utilities who have an interest in continuing on fossil fuel and actually getting to renewables a lot faster. And in all the communities where we're doing this, the customers are getting less expensive energy that's more clean, more renewable, greener, less greenhouse gas emissions than the traditional utilities like PG&E, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric.
Now, can you tell the viewers where the communities, so they know if they have it in their community, and also where we're fighting to get it so that they can help in the fight?
To be honest, it's hard to keep track because there are so many of them. There is a group called LEAN, L-E-A-N, and I forget, they have a long website name, but if you look up LEAN and Community Choice, you'll find their site, and they've actually got a map, and you can look at a map of where the current communities are that have community choice, and where the ones that are exploring it are, and the ones that are about to start up. I know many of them, but I would just be tossing them off the top of my head. There are some that are getting off the ground in the San Diego area, although San Diego itself hasn't gone forward yet. San Francisco, Marin County, Contra Costa County, Alameda County, San Mateo County, the whole peninsula up there. Alameda County is getting ready to do it. So these things, there's so many of these things I can't even remember them all. But that's the situation. This is going gangbusters. There's a problem though. There's a little bit of a problem, and people need to be aware of it. And that is, once we get most of the state in these community choice programs, if they are not building local clean energy, then there's going to be too much demand on clean energy and not enough supply. So once these programs get off the ground in your community, it's very important that you become an active citizen for your community choice program and push for local installation of local renewables, efficiency, battery storage, demand response, all the things that go into a clean energy garden is what I like to describe it as.
Yeah. Now, do you guys have a toolkit for people? So, because you just said a lot of names, and I'm sure terms that a lot of people aren't familiar with. It would be nice to have a little handy, one sheet on what they need to be asking for.
We do not. Californians for Energy Choice really focuses. Our laser focus is Sacramento and pushing against bad bills and pushing for good bills. But there is a really good group called Local Clean Energy Alliance. Local Clean Energy Alliance. I think that's localcleanenergy.org. And if you go to their site, you have to fish around a little bit, but you will find the kind of guidelines you're looking for. How to start a good local community choice program that does local renewables.
Okay.
So folks should look for that, localcleanenergyalliance.org.
Okay, if somebody wants to find that and put it in the comments, that'll save me a trip. And I'm going to let you go now. I think Adam has dropped out. So I'm going to say, he's back. I'm going to put him back in here now. I'm going to say thank you both for informing us about this terrible bill. AB 813 that we all have to be calling, and the link to the senators' names are going to be put in the comments as soon as I'm done doing this show. So I want to thank you both for being on, and I do need to talk to my viewers about another bill that they have to support, and they have to make sure it does not get watered down, and that's California's net neutrality bill. So thank you very much, and I'm going to myself now.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for having us on. Take care.
Okay.